Welcome to the Poetry Box Live. I'm Shawn Aveningo-Sanders, and we're so very happy that you could join us today. For those of you who may be tuning in for the first time, my husband Robert and I run an independent press here in Portland, Oregon, known as the Poetry Box. And to help support our authors reach a broader audience, we host the Poetry Box Live on the second Saturday of each month. We publish about 25 to 30 poetry books per year, plus our annual journal, the Poeming Pigeon. And for today's show, we have three extremely and popular talented poets who will be reading from their forthcoming books. Today's featured poets include Vivian Popperl from Portland, Oregon, Juan Pablo Mobili, who will be reading from New York, and Farley, who is also joining us from here in Oregon. All right, so let's get started. Our first featured reader is Vivian Popperall. She is the author of A Nest in the Heart, which takes us on a journey through Europe, South Africa, and the Willamette Valley of Oregon, exploring how the stories of our ancestors help us find our way and where we belong. Vivian lives in Portland, Oregon. Her poems have appeared in Clackamas Literary Review, Timberline Review, Cirque, Rain Magazine, The Poeming Pigeon, and other publications. She won second place in the 2021 K. Snow Award for Poetry by the Willamette Writers. Her dream landscape is Provence, southern France, but she considers the Pacific Northwest her home. Please welcome Vivian Popperall.
Thank you so much, Shawn, and thank you everyone for being here. I'm so excited. Such a happy afternoon for me. When I was little, and adults would ask me, what do you want to be when you grow up, little girl? I always said, I want to live on a farm and write books. Well, I don't live on a farm. I live in Portland, Oregon, but I've written a book. And I have to thank Shawn and Robert and the Poetry Box for working with me so patiently and kindly to bring this book into the world. I also need to thank my teachers, Claudia Savage and Kim Stafford, especially Claudia and Kim. I have to say thank you to Pauline Peterson, who is the Poet Laureate Emerita for Oregon, for so generously and kindly and graciously welcoming me into the community of poets. And talking about my community of poets, I need to thank my critique group, my salon, poetry salon group, and my writing partner, Susie Harris. And thank you to all of my dear friends and to my family, especially my siblings who have accepted my claim of poetic license. I'm very grateful. And to my husband, Franz, and daughter, Simone, and son-in-law, Shawn, for your unwavering love and support. Most of all, thank you all for being here today. My heart is really full. Let's read some poems. Conversing with my mother's father in the afterworld. I know some Yiddish. He knows some English. We both know the sound of a kettle boiling. I offer my grandfather lemons and strawberry jam for his tea. He chooses a sugar cube, holds it between his teeth, sucks his tea through the sweet strainer. I tell him chocolate. I tell him mint. Somewhere in his old country, snow is falling. Somewhere in his old country, heavy black shoes trudge through deep snow. I tell him green. I tell him puddles. I tell him rain. I tell him matted leaves, loam. I tell him mud. I tell him Douglas fir, hemlock, spruce, pine. He tells me honor. He tells me security. He tells me hard work. He tells me gentleness. He tells me 20 years growing corn on that flat, dusty African plain were the happiest of his life. Thank you. In my next poem, I try to imagine my mother's mother experiencing her first winter in South Africa. This poem is called First Winter in Koppies, South Africa. We smell winter arrive in smoky trails of wind lurking low over dry fields. Gray dust fills our mouths and eyes. I knit hats for the children, pull them low over their ears each morning. They always come home bareheaded. They itch, Mama, and we can't hear our friends count to 100 when we hide in the ditch. Daytime sunshine lulls us into shucking our coats. Sunset winds surprise us with tremolo blasts of cold. Evenings blaze orange and red against a black-blue sky. Winter nights are so dark. Stars pierce the sky with light, as white as icicles, hanging off the roof of our old house in Lithuania. This next poem is for my mother. It is after a poem by Liesl Mueller, and it is where I found the inspiration for the name of this collection, A Nest in the Heart. The poem is called Devotional. The words "start over again" held no terror for her. The wide brown eyes of her 5-year-old self saw cattle cars and snow, steamships and oceans, the full moon over Table Mountain. She fixed her steady gaze on medical school in Johannesburg, left the safety and love of her parents' home in the dusty town. She kept her nerve as a widow, crossed continents and oceans, brought with her the nest she stowed in her heart. She walked in the snow in Cleveland, pressed her stick down firmly to the sidewalk, reached for bedrock with every step. Thank you. My mother loved visiting us in Oregon, and she particularly loved Central Oregon. This next poem is also for her. It's called Deschutes River Dream. The river is green, opaque, swift. Current runs steady, deep. Reeds sway at river's edge. Hooded mergansers rustle, break free. Tree swallows cut the sky into blue scraps above yellow kayaks. An osprey folds black wings, plummets head down into glassy depths, emerges, a line of silver between its talons. We 3 bicyclists roll down the path beside the river. Sunshine glints, blinds. We turn to cross the wooden bridge. Tires thud, bump across each join between planks. We stop, look back along the river. A woman appears among the ponderosa pines. Tendrils of gray hair escape her green straw hat, a scarf threaded tightly through the brim, knotted below her chin. I recognized her upright stance, her direct glance. My mother stands poised at an easel, slim black paintbrush between her fingers. For a long minute, she stares at us. Then she is gone. When I awake, I search for the painting. There's the bridge, arching over the green river. There are the 3 cyclists. There, the brown dog. There, always, the blue sky. Thanks. And now a poem for my father. It is called my father. My father drove a turquoise chrome-finned Buick. He wore a suit and tie and fedora 5 days a week. My father turned our backseat squabbles into silly songs. He spun limericks out of starlings with engagement rings, chortled about guinea fowl strolling slowly abreast, wings behind their backs, like old men walking home from services, heads bowed. My father kept us holding our breath, swallowing our guffaws, waiting for his resonant voice to fill the car with more side-splitting doggerel. My father relished words. At dinner, he served up discussion, while my mother ladled chicken soup and filled plates with roast. My father kept a carved wooden box on his desk, empty except for a paperclip and the aroma of cherry tobacco. My father sat in a dark room under a circle of light. He turned each word in a contract this way and that, then dropped it into a sentence or excised it. My father savored the mot juste. Let me tell you. The daily newspaper, circa 1960, Johannesburg, South Africa. Twice a day we welcomed you, proud to be a 2-paper-a-day family. Ran Daily Mail in the morning, liberal, critical, satirical, risque. Dad read you first at breakfast after his morning swim. He left you bent half open and folded over at the story that caught his eye. When you reached our hands, you smelt lightly of chlorine and soap. You bore spots of tea, butter, and honey. The Star evening paper was conventional, conservative. When it arrived, we flipped the tall pages to the political cartoons, tried to fathom the stories behind the sketches. Before Dad came home from work, we folded you back into your original neat shape, matched the creases, smoothed the damp holes in the front page from the teeth of the golden cocker spaniel who failed the day's lesson of how to pick you up. We tried to forget gritty black and white photographs of slim black children in gray V-necked sweaters, running from police, eyes uncertain. In my childhood in South Africa, we had servants. Emma was our maid, and this poem is for her. It's called Emma Mends the World. Her fingers coax the old light bulb into the woolen sock. She slides it up to the hole in the toe, positions the bulge to stretch the ragged edge, make each remaining stitch visible. She slides the needle, a silver splinter trailing a red tail through the intact stitches, gathering, anchoring, laying a fine lattice work across the hole, weaving the sliver of silver back and forth to repair. She adds knots, fine, tight, to prevent more unraveling. In a swift movement, she brings the sock, still swollen with the light bulb, to her mouth. Her teeth flash as they catch the red darning thread, snap it cleanly. She pulls out the light bulb, folds the red sock with its mate, grabs another damaged piece from the mending pile. I have just 2 more poems. Thank you. I have to read you one from my late teenager years in South Africa. It's called Hitch, or My Summer of Love. That was the summer I hitched a ride to Swaziland. At the volunteer work camp, poems of love stitched the blue sky. I made my pitch to be one of the bricklayers, but I'd never laid brick before. So instead, my job was to fill in the cracks between the bricks with floppy cement. My work partner was a snitch. She worked the other side of the wall and reported if I left any fissures between the bricks. After 3 days, I was demoted to the water bucket line. I'd finally found my niche. Struggle uphill, weighed down by a full pail, then stroll back to the river to fish love poems from the muddy shallows. And for my last poem this evening, thank you. My last poem is called Land and Body. My crib was pink wood, my blanket soft white, but my bed was inside a long swaying sling, moving from continent to continent, rocked by the rhythms of trains, steamships, and airplanes. The rocky spine of the koppie, with its narrow, dusty, twisting paths behind our house, called to me, but I could not stay. Women in dark rooms, cold continents away, cooking, sewing, cleaning, gave me their dark eyes, their thin lips, their tight curling hair. The broken threads of their lives quivered in heat waves, rising off dusty paths, empty asphalt roads. The ether of their lives reformed and settled in me. Now, my back rests in the soft black loam of the Willamette Valley. My belly fills with sweet blueberries from Hillsborough, peaches from Dayton. My skin blooms to the sun's rays. My blood rushes with the gray sluice of rain. Here, I conceived and birthed a daughter. She swam through my heart and my heritage. She grew and left this green and cloudy place. Returns with the seasons for celebrations, Thanksgiving, New Year's, Labor Day. The past's tendrils twist through me, curl through her, hold us tight. Thank you so much.
Oh, Vivian, I cannot tell you how much I have enjoyed this whole collection of poems. They are just such beautiful love letters to your family. And I hope you realize just how much you honor them by writing them and then sharing with us today. I mean, it was gorgeous. I can't thank you enough. Just a true delight. Okay, our next featured poet is Juan Pablo Mobili, who is the author of a new poetry collection, Contraband, where he shares poignant family memories against the backdrop of dictatorship, revealing what he calls a hard-earned joy. Juan was born in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and is an adopted son of the city of New York. The son of a teacher and a poet, his work tells the story of the joys and tragedies of being a citizen of two countries, willing to face life head-on. His poems have appeared in the American Journal of Poetry, Mason Street Review, the Red Wheelbarrow Review, the Banyan Review, New Feathers Anthology, and Spitfire Review, among many others. Juan was a finalist of the Poetry Box Chapbook Prize for 2021. His poetry received an honorable mention by the International Human Rights Art Festival for the Creators Justice Awards in 2020. He has also received multiple nominations for the Pushcart Prize and the Best of the Net anthology. Please welcome Juan Pablo Mobili.
Thank you, Shawn. Thanks, everybody. So first of all, thank you all for being here. Of course, my friends and family, but also everyone who's here. I don't take lightly that people chose to come and listen to poems on a Saturday night. I think there is hope for humanity when I see that. Shawn, thank you so much, not only for hosting such a wonderful event, but also for your partnership and the care you put on everything we did to have the book be ready for publication soon. So thank you. So pretty much she said enough about where I'm from, etc. What I would say is this: I think, at least for me, but I think it's true for all of us, we don't only belong to a place, but we belong to a certain time in that place, and we belong to certain people in that place. And I think my poems are ultimately about that, about the place, the time, and the people. So I'm going to read some poems that kind of take care of all of that. And I'm going to begin with the title poem, which basically talks about that time of dictatorship that Shawn mentioned. This was during a decade in Argentina known as the infamous decade, where arguably 30,000 people were taken away from their homes, not recognized as being arrested, and many of them went on to die very soon after. Contraband. I come from a place where everything was banned. Whatever was made of red and billowed, and the words that could inspire solidarity. What was prohibited included songs, the length of hair, skirts, and sorrows, the extent to which a body may love another body, visiting countries more welcoming than ours, the study of psychology if Freud and Jung were taught, protesting injustice or high prices in the streets, and mothers walking silently in circles, hoping their daughters and their sons would be returned. When you live in places where a deep breath may someday be outlawed, learning to hide what you might think is an imperative. You become savvy about carrying suitcases with false bottoms and paying attention to moon cycles before you load the truck for the night drive over the mountain. You must learn to master all sorts of contraband. Neatly fold the newspaper you leave between you and the stranger sitting on the same bench of a certain park. Or memorize the password that signals it is safe to shake hands. You learn to master contraband, but nothing will be sadder than a secret you cannot shout. Thank you. Thank you. So this is, I would say, a sort of a self-portrait. Once in a while I write my version, my Argentinian version of a self-portrait. This is one of them. It's called Hummingbird. The only picture of Ramakrishna I've ever seen shows a saint skinny as a rail, legs fine as stems crossed upon a mat, and thin arms falling like mist upon his thighs. I am moved by that. I'm still and always a boy from Argentina who sipped the wine of his father's profound soul and sucked eagerly the milk of his mother's godly determination. I could have been a body violated and alone, but I was not, and I'm profoundly grateful for that. I aspire to nothing less than the courage of a hummingbird, flying in place, a hero to flowers. Thank you. Thank you. So my book is dedicated to three very important people in my life, the people who shaped me. My mother, my father, and my beloved wife of 38 years, Madalasa, who's here. They all tried to make a better person out of me, and hopefully they succeeded to some extent. So this poem is particularly with my mother and my wife in mind, but it's also for, I would say, for every woman who still needs to assert her voice in a society that remains fairly patriarchal. So this is called, They Thought They Were Angels. And by the way, the reference is a reference to a circus act. It is fictitious. They thought they were angels. Those were the years when the flying Panini brothers would soar onto the modest void of their small tent, holding a roses. Those were the years when the flying Panini brothers would soar onto the modest void of their small tent, holding a roses stem between their teeth, like a bear carries her cubs. As imperfect as they were, they thought they were angels. On the ground, they were fallible creatures, but in midair, they felt holy, like hummingbirds God made with his own hands. Those were the years when young women came back from the prom with their brand new dresses ripped under their coats, after some holy boy dropped them off at their homes. You could see them driving away, drunk and laughing down the street, and disappear into a darkness that would last forever in the young girls' hearts. Those were the years where all of God's voices led us to silence, to admire men because they seemed to glide under the circus tent, unimpeached by conscience or society under their tiny capes. And now they're beginning to fall one at a time, like the fruit of a misshapen tree that finally dies, like impostors with wings who thought they were angels. Thank you. So I will read three more poems. So one for my father, one for my mother, and one for my wife. All I can say about this one is the story is true as much as a poem is interested in truth. And it's called God, My Father, and the Bombing of the Churches. To Jorge Enrique Mobili, my father. My father was an atheist. He insisted on it every time the conversation drifted toward religion or talk became about driving my mother mad. My mother was the daughter of the devout president of Our Lady of the Gardens Alumni Association, the convent school across the street. My grandmother was furious. Her child fell in love with someone who had forsaken Jesus and would only offer my father a stare as cold as the steel of Gabriel's sword. But the story is really about 1954, when our president decided to empty every hangar in Buenos Aires and bomb the churches of our city. The roaring of white light began early. My grandmother, true to the Lord's mission, walked to the convent and commanded the 9 resident nuns to take refuge in the safety of her home, 50 feet from where they lived. My father, the thin man without a God, was there and spent the night making them laugh, pouring them mate, and tending to 9 frightened sisters. Whenever he was not standing on the roof, cursing the bombers, daring the bombs, a cigarette between his lips, while they lit up the sky of Buenos Aires. Good. The explosions went on all night, but no bomb, sorry. I know, go. That was my son, Sergio. He's, okay, bye-bye. All right, so sorry about that. Okay, so the explosions went on all night, but no bomb ever fell close to the lady of our garden. The morning broke, and the bombers fled like vampires to the shelter of their coffins. And the nuns walked single file back to their convent, led by my father, who insisted on seeing them to safety. That was also the moment, my mother told me, as she swayed in the memory of a triumph, that my grandmother fell in love with the only atheist she would ever care to love. I know my father was given a medal by the nuns. It was gold-plated with the Holy Mother's face on it. And although he never carried it, he saved it, just in case heaven existed. Thank you. Thank you. All right, so this is about my mom. It's called Farewell. It's about her passing also many years ago. And all I can tell you is that the first 2 lines are pretty close to the message, the phone message I received to let me know that she had us back in Buenos Aires. I was already living in New York. So that is true. Farewell. My mother passed away in the back of a Buenos Aires taxi. Her friend thought she was sleeping. My mother loved taxis. On buses, she was somber, circumspect, like a locksmith attending to the groove that would unlock a single door. But in taxis, she would come alive. They were a luxury she let herself enjoy. Delighting in the traffic, counseling the driver, on joyous purpose. In the back seat, she would imagine what ease of means might be. Had she not chosen to be ashes, scattered where my father's were, the hearse would have been followed by a caravan of black and yellow taxis. You would have seen old and young men driving without passengers in mourning for my mother. Trucks would not impose their size and cut anyone off for a change. And the lights would turn green as they approach each corner. I think she would have loved to know that they all came to pay respects, a line as long as a pedestrian's eye could see. Bus drivers would suddenly stop making fare change and bow their heads. At the eulogy, the priest would raise his hands and slowly say, "Farewell, beloved passenger. May the scent of vinyl that always brought you joy accompany you to heaven. Farewell." Thanks very much. Thank you. My mother thanks you too. I know she knows you're applauding. And just one more page, just to finish, I will finish with the last poem of the chapbook, which is unfortunately very timely. I was talking to my wife, Mother, this poem is for her, and this is how timely it is. Unfortunately, it's timely, and I hope it doesn't become timeless and things get better. But it's called What Wakes Me Up When It's This Dark. What wakes me up when it's this dark? My bladder or my soul? The thought that cruelty may lie inside the heart next to devotion. The nagging realization that the world my sons inherited will need more repairing than the one my father left me. The counting of dear friends who left us or chose some form of silence to stay among us. Wondering if birds would remain flying if they thought at the same time that they could fly. Considering the irony of traveling far from what was evil and stumbling into its familiar face exactly where I live. The mane of a dictator dyed in colors that don't exist in nature. What lies beneath the mane? The creature itself. My soul more than my bladder. My sons more than my soul. My wife breathing next to me. My wife next to me. Her breath. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Juan. Yeah, I hope you know just how special this book is. These stories are filled with such lush, evocative imagery and language, and they're a treat to read, and even a bigger treat to hear you read them aloud. So thank you. Thank you so much for sharing with us today. It was just so beautiful. And, you know, the poem about your father in the church during the bombing, and you know, you can't help but think about the people in Ukraine right now and how bombs are falling on hospitals and churches and everywhere they shouldn't be falling. And not that they should ever fall, but I hope people over there have somebody like your father to help them through these times, because he just sounds like a remarkable man. So thank you for sharing that with us today. Our final poet is Anne Farley, who is the author of Tell Her Yes, a collection of poems that speak to the language of forgiveness, patience, humility, and reverence for life. Anne Farley, poet and caregiver, is happiest when she's outdoors. She loves the beach, but she also loves an early morning walk in the park with her husband and dog. Her poems have appeared in Timberline Review, Willamette Journal, Verse Weavers, The Poeming Pigeon, Cosmos Quarterly, Rain Magazine, and many others. Her poems have won first and third place in the Oregon Poetry Association contest, and she was awarded third place in the Case No Award for Poetry. Tell Her Yes was also a finalist in the Poetry Box Chapbook Prize for 2021. Please welcome Anne Farley.
Thank you so much, Shawn. And thank you, Juan and Vivian. It's a delight to read with you. Shawn and Robert, working with you guys has been fabulous. You are organized and professional, incredibly creative, and you made it such a personal and wonderful journey. It's been an absolute joy. Thank you. I need to thank 4 wonderful poems who have been so supportive to me. Pauline Peterson was actually the very first poetry workshop I attended was at a friend's church, and I met Pauline and learned about springboards, and it's been a great journey with her since. The first time I gave a public reading Carolyn Martin was sitting in the audience, and I was just absolutely nervous as could be. And here was this wonderful woman sitting there smiling and nodding and getting me through. And she's just been a great treasure in my life and continues to help me through. Penelope Scambly-Schott is just a builder of the most positive poetry community around. I think she's a friend to everybody she meets. And there's lots of stories there. I won't go into it. Emmett Wheatfall, a lot of the poems that I'm going to read, well, that I've written, would never have been written without his encouragement. I was at my first Oregon Poetry Association conference, and we were in a workshop together, and we had wrote to some prompts, and he said, well, are you going to read? And I said, well, no, I wrote about death and dying, and who wants to hear about that? And he gave me a look, and he said, let me see that. And he read it, and he said, you need to write this, and you need to share this. You need to speak your truth. And I want to do a plug for him. He actually has a poem entitled Write the Poem. So if you're a writer out there, don't edit yourself. Go for it. I want to thank my wonderful critique group, which also includes Vivienne. So it was great to hear your poems again. Susie Harris, Dale Champlin, and Chris Demians. My good friend Sherry Levine is she's my poetry Jewish mother who says, so did you send the poem out? You got to send it out. So thank you so much for your support. And I thank my friends at Writers in the Grove, too many to list. My mom, Ray Daly, is somewhere on this. Oh, here's my dog. I want to thank you for all the places you've taken me. Travel shows up in a lot of my poems. Actually, my mom took me to my first poetry reading when I was 16 or 17, still in high school, and we went over to Fairleigh Dickinson University. She doesn't remember it, but I do. It was just like, wow, I want to do this. So here I am. And I want to thank my husband, Kevin Farley, for the space mentally, emotionally, and physically to write. And he's sitting here with me. He's not in a little box. He's here in the room with me, supporting me on. And thank you all for showing up, for being here and spending this time with us. That's just a delight. The first poem I'm going to read is the title poem, where the title comes from the last line of this very short poem, Window. Move the woman with dementia to a window. Ask her what she sees. Go with her. Tell her yes. In my work as a caregiver, I've been blessed to know some really fabulous and amazing people. And some, not all, some of them have been on a journey through dementia. And I've assisted them and gone with them on that. On the sunset, eastbound. We leave earlier than necessary to go to the neurologist's office. I lie about the appointment time. Nothing slows an old man like being rushed. We snake the sloping curves to the tunnel into Portland. Traffic thick, but moving until abruptly it isn't. I calculate the distance left. Chances of finding parking near an elevator, hallways we need to walk, how often he might shuffle to a stop, to ask a question or look out a window. Time trickles while we sit like rocks in a river. I'm careful not to fidget or sigh, but he leans forward, examines the cars, the hillsides, the tall trees, the downward twist of the road. Then he focuses on me, his eyebrows arch. He says, "This is good. I know this place." In addition, another aspect of working with the elderly is there's the end of life journey. And this poem comes from that. Dahlias. I don't want to arrive too early for the meeting at the rehab center. So I go to my garden, cut all the dahlias I have. 4. They flop around my Goodwill vase. I cut lemon balm, rose campion, lavender, and 2 red-hot pokers. Enough to fill. Jan is terminal. Rehab seems beside the point. I've been a caregiver for years, so the family has asked me to come, to talk. I bring absurdly happy pink dahlias with yellow centers. You can't go to a place like that empty-handed. Jan reaches but hasn't the strength to hold the vase. We go to a conference room. I place the dahlias on the table. Jan's daughter moves them aside so we can see each other. I ask, what would you like to know? I'm no advisor. I'm there to say what needs to be said. Facility, home, agency, bed bath, morphine, bed sores, palliative care, hospice. Her daughter asks, Mom, what do you want? Jan says, comfort. She gazes at the vase. Comfort, no pain. She is beyond sentences. Ice cream, she says. Dahlias. I think the single most important aspect of being a caregiver, the job I've done, is to listen. They talk to me about dying. Many are ready to go. Their children don't want to hear it. This great relief in reviewing life, readying home and mind for leaving, little left to fear or want except to be heard fully by someone, anyone. I am the hired help. I do laundry, change beds, cook meals, clean the kitchen. I scrub backs, wipe bottoms, rinse hair, thread arms through sleeves, roll socks on swollen feet. I brew tea. I sit at a table and listen. They tell me of affairs and abortions, their father's depression, the flood that erased the family farm, fleeing an abusive spouse, being hit with a hairbrush by their mother, surviving polio while a sister didn't, a son who molested a daughter the day they took their last drink, the child they lost, the child who was arrested, the child they disowned. Regrets huddle around us. Good memories surface too, soaking in a spa in Japan, lakes swum, races won, the granddaughter who visits and plays the piano, meeting and courting their spouse, the summer they taught their children to sail, the first home they owned, the horse they rode to school, and the dog that followed them there and waited. They ask if there is an afterlife, if I believe in God, if there's a heaven, if dying hurts. They tell me they are tired. They tell me they are at peace. They feel free to talk in a way they've never talked before. I carry the secrets of the dead long after. Thank you. Years ago, 2 women I know lost their spouses of many years at about the same time. And then a dear friend of mine lost her an adult son to illness. And this poem came from conversations with them about that. And this poem is one I send every time I send a sympathy card. And you're welcome to send it too. Mourning. Grief knows no time, comes and goes as it pleases. Try to push it away, box and shelve it, busy it into the shadows, but still it will come on hint of a breeze, work its way in and settle like dust everywhere. Or it will come in a cold gust, a rushing whirl of twirling chaos, a relentless tree-bending wind. Just breathe and breathe again. Acknowledge its comings and goings and accept its truths. There is love tucked in sadness, honor afloat in tears, 1,000 memories shared in a sigh. Sometimes the best you can do is nothing at all. Sit with loss and let it be. Thank you. It's going to get a little lighter now. When people ask me to describe this collection of poems, I say it's where nurture meets nature. This is for Kevin. I am the river. This is how we are, like the bay where the salmon river tangos through tall marsh, Sitka snags, and driftwood before spilling into the Pacific. At our best, we are an expanse of blue, a shallow of nurture, home to gulls and eagles, herons and harbor seals, fish and frogs, dragonflies like jewels. Wind-bent trees offer shade and shelter. At our worst, we are a flat, muddy expanse, drained and wanting. Our murky underbelly exposes long silences and storm damage, the unexpected seasons of drought. Still, we flow on, curling and settling in comfortable furrows, filling, emptying, filling again. We weather frothy unrest and cold gray mist, await the return of sun and stars and right moon guidance. I am the river, a coursing flow, spits of anger and washes of calm, cool water. And you are the shores of my containment, the earth and rock and sand. Thank you. Travel has been an amazing, eye-opening gift, and I'm happy to say I have been both to Argentina and South Africa. So, Juan and Vivian, you know, you're I feel I have a little bit of those places in my heart. My mom loves to travel to the out of the ordinary places. That's been a tremendous gift. And this poem takes place in the Sahara of Tunisia. Buzzed. The buzzard doesn't hit the windshield so much as swim across, talons skittering, tail feathers fanned, a swooping rush of black, white, and rust brown. The driver and I fling up arms and duck. The vehicle swerves, but there's no road, no oncoming traffic. Just flat hardpack where sand used to be and will come again. The others in the back seat yell out, want to know what's happening, but the buzzard disappears as abruptly as it came. The driver clasps his turban, no longer shy and distant, flashes me a wide-eyed smile. We both hoot a laugh. He will go back to looking ahead, fingering wooden prayer beads looped on the steering wheel, but the sands have shifted. The ride is smooth. And this is the last poem, something light to carry us on. Flight. Don't you wish now and then you could hold open a book, spine splayed, pages fluttering, heft it above your head so pages turn to wings as you clutch the covers, front and back, and let it lift you up, up, up. Thank you so much.
Oh, Anne, that was wonderful. And what a perfect poem to end that on. That was really perfect. You know, it's such a rare talent to share such intimate details of aging and death and all that fear, and to still leave us filled with beauty and grace and hope. I don't know how you pull that off, but you do it magnificently. And I think everyone who was lucky enough to read this book will find themselves echoing a quiet yes. So thank you for writing this, and thank you so much for sharing it with us today. Let's have a giant round of applause for all of our readers today. And thank you to you, our audience, for joining us for another edition of the Poetry Box Live. You know, as poets and authors have really been impacted by the pandemic and the limited reading venues across the country, it really means the world to us that you joined us here on Zoom to celebrate their poetry on a Saturday night. So that's wonderful to have you all here. Thank you. And for April, we're going to switch it up a bit. We're going to have a very special edition of the Poetry Box Live to celebrate National Poetry Month. And so we thought it'd be fun to share the love of poetry with a slightly younger audience. So we're going to have two authors reading poetry they've written especially for kids, sharing their poems from their new books. The show will take place a little earlier than normal on Saturday, April 9th. It'll be at 2 p.m. Pacific time. And we'll have two featured authors. The first will be Pamela Anderson Barthollet, reading from her charming poetry book, The Galloping Garbage Truck. And then Debbie Hall will be reading and also sharing her photos from her new book, In the Jaguar's House. So parents and grandparents, we really invite you to bring your favorite little ones to this very special show next month. And to keep up to date on upcoming shows, new releases, and submission opportunities, please subscribe to our newsletter by going to thepoetrybox.com, where you'll find a sign-up form at the bottom of each webpage. Thanks again for joining us today. We look forward to sharing more poetry with you next month on the Poetry Box Live. Feel free to unmute yourself if you want to chat with the poets or ask any questions. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Beautiful poems, powerful. Thanks, Anne.
Yeah, thank you, Anna.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you so much.